and all the stuff we're going through. You know, this next month, March, which starts tomorrow, Easter's next month. If you remember back, it was about along that time last year that all this mess started.
Yeah.
We've been going through the pandemic, I call it, for about a year. I mean, you could talk about what went on in a year. We could spend the whole Sunday school on just that. But we can see how the Lord's helped us through all of this, and He's still helping us.
Yeah.
We got to stick with Him, keep going. Every time I see Brother Roger, I ask him how he's doing. Well, I don't know. He'll say, we got to keep it going. Well, we do. And the time we spend here on this earth is short compared to eternity. What we looked at last time was we were looking at Babylon. Just let me sum up what we did last time. It'll help us understand. I think if we get an idea of what all those symbols are in Revelations, it helps us understand what he's talking about.
Right.
And it'll help us see where we are now.
Right.
I think we're further along than a lot of people than I realized. I think we're further along than we realized. Last time we talked about Babylon as being the financial system of the whole world. It's not just this country or certain countries, it's the whole world. And in the Revelation, it talks about Babylon. We went over a lot of descriptions of it. Babylon being the financial system, you could call it that. But it's how Satan, through people, rule the world through finances. I grew up, and my daddy, you know, it's just the way things work. He took me to the bank, introduced me to the banker, and I signed up and bought an old car, and I've been paying notes all my life on something. You know, it's just the way it works. I'm sure nobody else in here does that. But we borrow money, pay interest. On a car, we pay taxes. We buy fuel, we pay taxes. We buy a tire, we pay taxes. Buy a house, that's my house, that's my land. Oh, yeah.
Pay taxes.
You quit paying the property taxes and see what happens to it. Don't pay that light bill for a month or two and see what happens. There's a financial system. The whole world works that way. In Revelation, we also looked at the beast. Remember the beast? He comes up out of the sea, got 7 heads, 10 crowns. That's nations, that's governments. So there's a financial system. There's governments over nations. There was another beast that came up that had 2 horns, and he's the false prophet. He's the religious system. So just in those 3, there's a financial system, the nations, the United States, Russia, China, whatever, the nations, and the people in those nations. And there's also worldwide religious system, Christians, Jews, Muslims. That's the main 3. But all of them, you know, the main ones right now is Muslim. Christian, that majority there is Muslim. But we saw in chapter 14, what we looked at, starting in verse 6, there's 3 angels. The first angel is flying into heaven, in the midst of heaven, with the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell under the earth, to every nation, kindred, and tongue. And I believe we're in the chapter where the rapture takes place. I believe that's worldwide revival. We're seeing that now. We're seeing things happen. If you look on your phone, it's going on everywhere in other countries. You ain't gonna see it on TV. You got to dig for it. But it's happening. And I think it'll be more powerful. It's great. The next angel, verse 8, and there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, a great city, because she made the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So there's a revival going on, and I'm going to say instead of Babylon, the world financial system, because that's what Babylon is. He calls it a great city. Later on, he calls it the prostitute.
You know, that first angel, you know, that he says he's flying around and he's preaching the gospel. I think that's the only place in the Bible that I've ever found where an angel even preached. So if I'm wrong, somebody showed me. That's the only time I've ever read it.
I think you're right. And this is the first time where Babylon, it's announced, Babylon's fallen. The third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead, the same shall drink the wine of the wrath of God. Notice this is before the wrath of God, warning people not to take the mark of the beast. What did the first angel say? Give glory to God. Worship God, instead of taking the mark of the beast. Well, that's just, we're coming into a time right now where it's going to get pretty hairy for people that serve God. If you stick with biblical principles and you don't compromise with what the world, the beast, is doing, then it's going to get rough. When they pass that Equality Act, have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
It's the new act that Congress has been talking about, and they've got control up there now. They'll pass it. That's going to give them full throttle legal reason to go after Christians.
That's right.
We're going to be hate speech if we don't go along with the agenda. They're teaching little kids now that you don't have to be a boy, you can be a girl. And we'll give you medicine and not tell your parents. That stuff's going on. Okay, now. And they'll pass that Equality Act.
It's a shame we even have to send them to places like that.
Well,
You're not even talking about teenagers, you're talking about 6-year-olds.
That's what I'm saying. They're just babies. You
Here-
can brainwash a child in 5 minutes.
well, I'm not going to get in a hurry with this. We're not going to get through all of it anyway. I think we've been brainwashed. We don't have to go along with that. We can say no. It's okay to say no. We've had a president for the last 4 years that have shown people that you don't have to go along with the establishment. You can say no, and it's going to cost to do it. But I cannot if somebody walked me and Ann's had this conversation, she asked me, what are you gonna do? If a man comes in here thinking he's a woman and he goes in the women's bathroom back there, I said, that ain't gonna fly.
That's right.
That's not gonna work. And here's something else, I'm not gonna marry a man and a man.
No.
I'm legal to marry folks in the state of Texas. I got my papers. But they can have them back and I'll tell them where they can put them. Because I'm not gonna do that. I know Brother Don's not gonna do that. Now that's what I'm talking about. It's getting real. It's here.
We will be asked.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
sure we will.
When are the leaders of the Christians gonna stand up to them?
I don't know.
It's the powerful one that on up there. Why don't they stand up and fight?
I think
Why
a
are they
few,
putting it on?
I think a few of them are.
Who?
I don't know, Brother Earl.
I mean, I never heard one on TV get up and stand up before Congress and say what they need to say. They always back down, or if they don't approve, they approve of it. They got them wish-washy,
Yeah.
but they got to stand up.
Well, what we went through several weeks ago, judgment starts at the house of God. You're gonna weed them out of the church, and that'll weed them out. This pandemic weeded a bunch of them out. Now, we've had to shut down, but we did it because so many of us was sick. We didn't do it because the government made us do it. Brother Don's looking out for his people. But what if they come in here and start telling us, here's your sermon for this week, preacher, and we're gonna have somebody sit here to make sure you don't get off out of line with it.
And that's when I'm gonna have to break the rules.
I think if they're ungodly rules, we need to say no. Because in this country, we still have a document that says we have rights. And a lot of these laws that they're passing goes directly against that document.
Absolutely.
Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights. And it specifically says in there, if they make a law that goes against the Declaration, then it's not a law. It's set up for the citizens. If the government fails, it's up to the citizens. And we're citizens. I like what old Captain said in Lonesome Dove. Gus told him he wasn't American. Remember what Captain told him? I'm American. Well, I am too. I was born here. And because I'm born here, but you don't have to be born here if you come in here legally. You can still be a citizen, just as much a citizen as I am. Or any. We have rights. Okay. We're talking about Babylon and the beast. Not to take the mark of the beast. That's where it was, I think, when we got off on the beast are the nations that are controlling the world, the financial system and the nations. Now we went through this last week. I'm still trying to summarize last time up here. In chapter 17, we went over where the nations really hate this financial system. And it's God's will. Let's see, that's 17, verse 15. chapter 17, verse 15, and it saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are the peoples, the multitudes, nations, and tongues. Okay, she's right on the beach, controlling the nation. The financial people, there's a handful, maybe a double handful, of families on the earth that controls the whole earth financial system. I know people would call me a conspiracy theorist for saying that, but it's the truth. It's been that way for decades. It's really been that way for centuries. It's the same thing the devil tempted Jesus with. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall take the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God's put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. So, the nations will turn on the financial system and destroy it, because that's God's will. But when does that happen? I think it's starting now. I think it's starting now. The Federal Reserve crashed the other day. That shut down banking in the United States. And when it shut down banking in the United States, it went worldwide. We hadn't heard about it because the news is not going to report it. But it shook the whole world financially. Shut it down for one day. If you see what Trump did when he was in office, the Federal Reserve sounds like a government bank, but it's not. And I just learned this. It's a privately owned bank. And they're in a lot of countries in the world. And there's a double handful of people that owns them. And that started back in the beginning of the 1900s. They've been in control that long. The IRS is chartered out of Taiwan or the Philippines. It's not part of the government.
Really?
Now, I know that sounds crazy, but it's the truth.
I didn't understand it until it was
The IRS purports itself to be part of the government,
That's not.
but it's chartered in another country. So our federal bank and the IRS that's been reaping money out of our checks all of our lives are part of the world system. Babylon. And when Trump was in office, he brought the Federal Reserve under the authority of the Treasury, which effectively broke their back. Now, you'd have to dig into that, and that's enough for me to know that Babylon is falling. To that now, in our lifetime, we're going to see this. And it takes divine intervention for something like this to happen. And I'm reading it to you right out of the book. Jesus told John this stuff 2,000 years ago. He said, this is what's going to be happening. And it's happening. So we're here, we're alive, we're seeing. If we dig for it. But what else is happening? I brought something. Let me just read this. I've been on this. This will help prove the point. I hate it when somebody snookers me. I hate it when I've been fooled. And I especially hate it when I found out I've been fooled all my life. The government takes in plenty of money to take care of everybody in this country. And they're not doing it. They're giving most of it away. John D. Rockefeller, this is the old man Rockefeller from the 1900s. They poked the first hole in the ground and started drilling oil. Standard Oil Company, one of the richest men, if not the richest man on earth at that time. He said, we'll keep them alive for a short time and we'll weaken their minds and pretend to be the opposite. Pretend they're helping us, but they're really keeping us down. We will use knowledge and science and technology so that they never see what happens. We use soft metals, aging accelerators, and such in food, water, and air. Wherever they go, they'll be covered in poison. All the food we eat now have pesticides on it. If you buy it in the store, you can get food that's not, but it's about twice as much. I grow it in my own garden. John Rockefeller came up with that way back then. We'll promise to find medicine from our many foundations, but in the meantime, we'll give them more poison. Giving us poison to make us sick, and then sell us medicine to get us well.
We're actually buying the poison too.
Yeah.
If it's on food, you're buying the poison too.
Yeah. Chemical poisons are absorbed through the skin of the people who think that great actors and musicians selling those products makes them look young. They're advertising it to make us look young, and creamy and soft and all this kind of stuff. It's got poison in it. I don't know if all of it does. I'm just telling you what John Rockefeller said over 100 years ago. I'm going to skip some of this because it just... We will continue to prosper from their wars and their deaths. In World War II, he sold gas and fuel to the Americans, and he sold gas and fuel to the Germans. Henry Ford sold vehicles to the Americans, and he sold engines and parts to the Germans. They make buckloads of money off of war. While we're fighting for our country, they're fighting to get their pockets full. We will repeat this until we reach the final goal. And I'm going to skip down to the final goal. They're going to keep us fighting one another. Blacks against the whites, the rich against the poor, Republicans against the Democrats, all part of the plan. Keep them in debt the rest of their lives. Tax it just goes on and on. We will use the media to flow information and control their emotions because we own the media.
That's right.
That was 100 years ago, he said. And their final goal is to own everything, control everything. I mean, how much money does one man need?
Guess it depends on what he wants.
Well,
I think it goes beyond money, and then they live off power. I mean, money's only worth what it's worth, but it's like they want something more than that.
Chris was reading me some, anyway, 90-something% of the entire money in the world is in 2% of the people's pockets.
Yes.
Something, is it 1%? 1%.
yeah.
We get what's left. Out of 97 or something.
There's a lot more to that. I just wanted to tell you enough to show you the system. This is Babylon, and it's in Revelation. Been there all along. And Babylon is falling. Okay. And it took me that long to summarize what I said. And add a little bit to it. And I hope people don't think I'm getting off on politics, but politics is part of what it is that's in the book of Revelation. That's what we're living today. We're seeing things that John, the Apostle John, wrote about 2,000 years ago. We're seeing it now. And back to chapter 14. After the angel warns not to take the mark of the beast, look what happens next in verse 14. Well, let's read verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, right, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and works do follow them. If we keep going, like Brother Roger says, we don't give up. We can't give up. We keep going. We keep doing what we know to do. Because us blessed. We're living in this time. There are people in other countries that are in worse shape than we are. A lot worse shape. But if we live through these times and we don't turn loose, think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar was Babylon of that day. And he built a golden statue. He had enough gold to build a statue out of it. And wanted people to bow down to his financial system, his government. And if you didn't bow down, they'd throw you in the fire. It's the same thing today. Using the same terms, just different, be a different fire. And when they pass this new law they want to pass, they can do it legally. And we've looked in chapter 14 for quite a few things. Let's look at one thing here. I skipped over the first few verses in chapter 14. So let's go back to verse 1, chapter 14, verse 1.
What book was that?
Revelation. Now this is happening after the seventh seal is opened and after the seventh trumpet blows. Now, before the rapture. Before the rapture. And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of great thunder, and I heard the voice of the harpers harping their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000, which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb, wheresoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Before all this stuff, or as this stuff is happening, it says Jesus comes to Mount Zion with 144,000. If we look back in chapter 7, that's 144,000 Jews. 12,000 out of 12 tribes. Now, what's happening? We know that when Jesus comes at the rapture, that's later on in chapter 14. He comes in the clouds and we go to meet him. And there's a marriage supper in heaven while there's wrath of God's going on the earth. We're called to a marriage supper in heaven. That's why we're taken out. And then everything breaks loose on the earth, but we're not here. When he comes back after that, he comes with the armies of heaven. Armageddon. So, what is this? That's what I see. What's he doing on Mount Zion with 144,000?
144,000. Are they people on earth, or are they something broader?
Well, that's what I want to try to figure out.
Oh, I'm in that bunch.
144,000. And he's trying, and this is not necessarily my opinion, but I've heard it said that these 144,000 will be preaching the gospel.
They could be. I think
Now,
they probably are.
Now, I don't, you know, that's what I've been told, and that's kind of what I believe, but now whether that's right or wrong, you know.
Well, the verses right after that's where we see the angels flying in the gospel streets, the revival's going on. Babylon's falling and warning people not to take the mark of the beast. And for all of that to happen, I think we need divine intervention. I think we need Jesus.
Well, it says these 144,000 will have the Father's name written on their foreheads. So maybe they will be coming to preach.
That's one thing. Look in verse 3. Which were redeemed from the earth. Look in verse 4. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And when I see a word like first fruits, I'm beginning to understand why the Holy Spirit had us go through those feasts for so long. Remember how long we went through that? Forever. Let's see. And it seemed like it, but we, you know, it was, we went all different directions while we was studying it. But that's not easy for Gentiles that ain't never heard about it to grasp. First fruits is the day that Jesus rose from the dead. That's the feast day. He rose from the dead, and the Bible calls him the first fruits from the dead. Right?
So is that the 144,000?
I've never been
No,
able to do it.
I won't say it like Brother Don says. This is Brother Dan. I'm gonna reason it out for you. You make up your own mind. But we've been through, most of us went through the feast, you know, and I know it's hard. I had to study more than y'all did because y'all just show up and listen for an hour or 30 minutes or whatever. But in Matthew, we're not going to get through this, just let me do this. When we were going through all this, in Matthew, I'll read it, you don't have to turn there. In Matthew chapter 27, there's a couple of verses that stuck in here that don't look like they mean nothing. They don't have nothing to do with what he's talking about. He's talking about when Jesus was on the cross, the 6th hour was darkness. Jesus cried with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. The veil of the temple was rent in two from the top to the bottom. The earth did quake and the rocks rent. And the grave, and here's the two verses, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept rose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection. So the earthquake was when he died, but they came out of the graves after Jesus was resurrected. They were dead when he was crucified. In the ground came an earthquake, and if you look, when the sixth seal, before these are chosen, the 144,000 are chosen, it's the same thing. Earthquake, darkness, same thing happened when Jesus was crucified. Rocks rent, and the leaders were scared to death. They were afraid because they heard it thunder. They knew Jesus had a sign on his cross, said, King of the Jews. Lazarus was walking around too. And now, after he rose from the dead, many of the bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after the resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto them. Now, you don't think that scared the daylights out of you? Grandma showed up at your house?
I don't mean that it'll make us run over, but I don't understand. Okay, the poor man was in Abraham and God's arms when he talked to the man. And Elijah or Elijah one didn't die. He rose and went to heaven. His body went to heaven. Our bodies are in the ground. Are those two and those saints the only bodies in heaven? Aren't there? Is our souls in heaven? Because the resurrection, isn't that when we get new bodies?
Yeah.
I just don't understand.
We got a heavenly body too. When the physical body dies, we go to heaven to be with him, but it's a resurrection.
That's our new body? That's not our new body.
No, that's not a new one. But what I'm saying here is,
No.
the 144,000 could have been chosen out of this group right here. Because remember what happens at the first fruits. I'm just going to run through this, we'll come back to this next week. At the Feast of First Fruits, the priest would go out in the field. It's barley harvest. And he would be real careful not to touch the ground. Remember when Mary saw Jesus, Jesus said, "Don't touch me, I haven't seen it to the Father yet." The priest was real careful not to touch the grain, but he would gather a set portion of that crop and take it to the temple and offer it to God. If God accepted it, the whole crop was good. But it wasn't just one stalk of bars. It was a good measure of the crop. Example, you know what am I trying to say? Sample. A good sample of the crop. Well, what did he call these were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits of God and the Lamb. Could these be part of their crop? And they were chosen out of the 12 tribes of Israel. And they followed Jesus wherever he goes. Look in this 14th chapter this week. Read that several times. They followed him to Mount Zion when Babylon's falling, when the gospel's being preached. They could be your neighbor, helping us, I think. Sometimes we got to have help. And sometimes God sends angels. But sometimes he sends people. You see in the Bible, sometimes somebody will show up and tell somebody something, and they'll fall down on their knees and start, "Don't worship me, get up. I'm just like you." Go ahead.
When he gathered those up to me, and he cut them so that he wouldn't touch the ground. So he was taking the purest part of them to offer in, so the part that was left in the ground would go back to dust.
Well, when they rose from the dead, they came out there with new bodies. That could be. We won't get into that. But that could raise questions. But these 144,000 came from somewhere for a reason, because they followed Jesus everywhere he goes. Read that description of them. They're special. They're only mentioned twice in Revelation. But they've got the Father's name sealed. Could that have been the ones that walked around in Jerusalem after Jesus was resurrected? Part of the first fruits. Not going to be us, because we're not you.